So, George, thank you for joining me. It's nice. It's nice to chat. It's been quite a few years, I think, since you and I last spoke, and
Yeah.
we'll get into in a little bit your kind of particularly how yoga has played a role in terms of supporting not just recovery from fatigue, but also some of the trauma and kind of PTSD elements of that. But before we go there, do you want to just say a little bit about what happened when you first started to get ill and just the kind of circumstances of that?
I mean, crikey, a long time. It's been a long time. So, I can trace Emmy back to when I was kind of 17, 18, when I was doing my A-levels. I went down with glandular fever, which I think is a very common trigger for lots of people with Emmy. And basically, I never really got better. I didn't take any time out really during my A-levels. I just basically carried on and never really got over that. And I went to university and sort of went through university at sort of probably about 70% or something. I had lots of symptoms, which at the time I just put down to, I never fully got over glandular fever. It'll go eventually. So like bad headaches and fatigue and blood sugar problems. I couldn't touch alcohol, which wasn't the best thing at university, maybe.
You and me both have had the same experience.
Yeah. So, and then I kind of graduated, and quite soon after graduating, I planned to go to law school a few months after graduating. I was in London. I was at university in London, and then went to law school in London. And I started having panic attacks and bad anxiety and all sorts of stuff. And then quite quickly, about a month after starting at law school, I got another virus, like an inner ear virus, and just completely crashed. That was 2005. And then, that was it. So I was 21 then. So I'm 35 now. So it's been like a hell of a journey to get to here, really.
And how did things unfold in the kind of early years? Like, what were some of the things that you did? How did things progress initially?
Well, initially I just thought that I just needed to take a bit of time out and I'd be fine. I just thought, like I keep referencing glandular fever, I just thought, I never really got over that because I'd just gone straight into like my final A-level exams, had that summer, gone straight to university, graduated, then gone straight to law school, So I thought, I just need a bit of time out, I'll be fine. But, and I suppose I was very fortunate. I was able to sort of go back to my family home, and, there was no, I suppose, financial pressures to sort of have to work to look after myself. So I was lucky in that respect. But basically I just didn't get better really. And I just sort of developed a whole host of other things. I had really bad brain fog, sort of quite a lot of cognitive problems, sort of like developed some quite intense OCD patterns and things. I almost feel a bit like the wilderness years, really. So I did try various treatments. I tried something called Mickle therapy for a while. I went to herbalists. I went to nutritionists. I then tried a very intensive lymphatic massage sort of program, which I actually did for about 18 months, and that just made me very, very ill. But I sort of kept on with it because the sort of practitioner who was doing it was convinced it was going to work and was very encouraging and to carry on with it and stuff. But and when I was doing that, my whole system just went haywire. My sleep pattern went completely haywire, and all these other symptoms, like I'm talking about, like the brain patterns and the OCDs, and just went far worse. And so and then eventually, I think it was January 2010 when I first came to the Optimum Clinic.
Yeah, and I remember that kind of lymphatic drainage kind of program you've been doing, I think that's a really good example of what can often happen, is that you can have approaches which really do help some people, and it's not the approach fundamentally is flawed, but one's body is kind of giving the feedback of saying this is too fast, this is too much, or this is simply not working. And when you have kind of overzealous practitioners that have all the right intentions, but are kind of ignoring that information from the body and overriding that, sometimes you can end up pushing the situation kind of deeper and deeper and worse and worse. And I think in your case, it went far beyond where it probably should have done, and it had some quite significant impacts, as I remember, in terms of then your quality of life was quite severely affected by that.
No, definitely. I mean, it's easy now with hindsight to look back and see what was going on, because obviously my system was in such a massively stressed, wired state. And then it was obviously being pushed physically with that treatment, that it was just compounded everything, massively. And and I think everything I've been doing up to that point, or the period before the Optimum Clinic, I think I was actually trying all the right things, but it wasn't, like I said, I saw nutritionists or herbalists, or I had to go at sort of cognitive style treatments, but because it wasn't all put together in a proper holistic way by people who probably fully knew what they were talking about, it just didn't really do anything for me. It just made everything worse, really.
Yeah. And so you came to Optimum Health Clinic and you were working with Helen on nutrition. You and I also had some sessions for a period of time.
Yeah.
Say a bit about what that period was like, and then we'll come to, I know that then one of the things that kind of came out of that was you started doing yoga, and that had a very significant, I think, impact. But before we come to that, just that early period, and just kind of how are things impacted at that point?
Yeah, so, initially I had a few sessions with Anna Dushinsky.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know if she's still with you or not, but I know she's still one of the, she and I work closely together on the practitioner training, right. So, and I had a few face-to-face sessions with her in London, and I think on about sort of session 4, she said that she thought I was actually suffering from a certain degree of PTSD with everything that I've been through. So she said that she wasn't really able to help me. What we were doing in the sessions wasn't really having any impact, because I was like, I suppose basically my system was traumatized. So it wasn't a lot of the sort of most common techniques to calm down were just not even coming close to the edges, So, and then she obviously said she could sort of recommend me to obviously people in London, but I'm based up in the northwest of England, so it obviously wasn't the best thing logistically. So, but in the end, we were actually very lucky that we found a trauma specialist about half an hour from where I live. She's actually quite an inspirational lady. A lady called Sue Hanish. So she was actually involved in an IRA bombing back in the early 90s and lost a leg, and she had her own journey with PTSD. So she now helps other people with that. So I started seeing her in sort of spring of 2010. But really nothing, but I really sort of chart my kind of progress and breakthrough that probably from 2011, when I sort of started doing yoga, basically. Up until that point, I think kind of therapy and even nutrition sessions, nutrition stuff I was doing was kind of having minimal impact, really, because I think I was still in a very stressed state. So. Yeah,
and I think some of the work that we do has evolved since that time. I was talking kind of, I guess, 8 years ago, and I think that it was interesting that Anna recognized the trauma and was like, I think you need to go and find someone to do that kind of one-on-one work, which I think definitely makes sense. And it's interesting as well that that one of the things that we've come to realize over the years is actually how important working with the body is in terms of digesting and processing trauma. And there are different ways of doing that. There are psychotherapeutic ways of doing that, but also there's a building evidence base that actually yoga is a very effective way to help literally metabolize and digest and process the trauma. So I'd love to hear a bit more about how that unfolded, because initially, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was more about doing yoga just to kind of support general kind of recovery. And then that kind of awareness of the impact it was having and kind of love for it started to grow from that.
No, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I suppose I must add, perhaps should have said earlier, that I think starting with the Optimum Clinic, I sort of think of it as it gave me the blueprint of actually what was actually going on in my body. You know, the fact that it wasn't just physical, the fact that it wasn't just psychological, whatever. It was a whole host of factors. And I suppose I was aware of the general, if you like, blueprint for recovery, which is basically you need to just calm your system down so then your body can heal. Obviously, because I was diagnosed with the trauma side, that made calming my body down a whole lot more difficult. But yeah, so I had tried a lot of techniques to kind of get a handle on my energy and stuff. Just sort of common things that you guys taught, like stops and EFT and even guided meditation and stuff like that. But I don't know, it wasn't really doing a huge amount. And then I don't know what it was that spurred me on to try yoga. I think someone said just maybe this could help, have a go. I don't know, but so I was very lucky. There's a yoga therapist who came to my house to sort of do one-on-one sessions. So she actually specializes in sort of helping people who have been ill or injured or something to do yoga, but she kind of tailors the program towards them. So I saw her, I think spring 2011, and the first time she came, so I should point out that I still do yoga every day. So, and now I can quite happily touch my toes, touch the floor. But when she first came, I could hardly touch my knees bending forwards. And then she sort of gave me some very, very gentle postures to have a go at for a couple of weeks. And yeah, it was weird because I didn't know at first what was going on, because I kind of felt something after doing it that I didn't know what it was. And it took me a while to actually realize that I was feeling a bit calmer. Because up until that point, I had no reference point for what it felt like to feel calm. It's like I was doing all this treatment and therapy stuff about calming yourself down, but I didn't know what the hell that felt like.
Yeah, it gave you a reference point for what it actually means to be in your body in a calm, healing state. And often having that reference point also makes it easier to get back to that point. But you need sometimes that reference, well, nearly always you need some kind of reference point first, so you know where it is that you're trying to get to.
Definitely,
And I know your yoga practice increased to the point you were doing, I think, 2-3 hours a day. You mentioned at one point. Like pretty serious commitment to practice.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so within about a month of first seeing Sarah, which is called, I was probably doing an hour a day, and that grew to 2 hours, and then there was probably a point where I'd maybe be doing 3 hours of yoga a day, not necessarily one long practice, but almost 2 or 3 practices in the day. But it was as though my body it just sort of craved it, like. And I should add this. This is hatha yoga, so it wasn't like I wasn't standing on my head or something or doing.
Yeah, you weren't doing
postures.
Hardcore Ashtanga. You were doing.
Yeah, it's quite trees and dancers and sun salutations and those warriors, those kind of things. And obviously, important focusing on the breathing and stuff like that to really help calm down. But it was like my body was just sort of, it couldn't get enough of it, basically.
Yeah. I was going to ask what you felt that how you feel it impacted in terms of the trauma, but it sounds like that part of it was just you were able to come back home to being in your body, and there was a sense of you could feel the calming and maladaptive stress response from using the practice.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was totally that. And I think I know you used the analogy of like a pendulum, and obviously when you get ill, your pendulum's right over one way, but to get better, you've got to have a certain period where the pendulum's right the other way. So for me, that was kind of doing lots of yoga. But yeah, it really gave me that reference point of feeling my body again, basically, and feeling safe in my body. And then the sort of like the trauma therapy sort of sessions with Sue, and I know I had some sessions with you, they started to actually make sense. It was though there was sort of some bedrock on which to then build the actual, the actual sort of psychology treatment, if you like, or other stuff that I was doing.
Yeah, it's almost how I see it. There's a kind of, we're locked in, let's say we're locked in this kind of state here, and we're just kind of used to being wired there. And then we need to get to this state over here. We don't really know what this is. And it's like you go from there to there and you experience that state. Then you go back to where you were, but you go, now I know where it is I'm trying to get. So then you can use other tools sometimes to help you get to that state. And then it kind of system goes back and you're retraining the homeostatic balance in your body. Like your body's got so normalized to being in a state of being hypervigilant and hyperwired that you have to kind of gradually retrain that over a period of time. And it's not just, trauma lives in the body very often. So we also have to digest and metabolize and process that's stored there. So that also makes sense in terms of the more we get into our body, the more we listen to our body, the more we move our body, that's all part of that kind of metabolizing process.
No, absolutely. I mean, you used the word just then, locked in, and that's exactly, I think, what it feels like with trauma. It's like your body is literally frozen in that state, and that kind of energy to do with perhaps past events or whatever is literally just stuck in your body, which is, I think, why the sort of more traditional psychology techniques that the clinic were trying to teach me originally just weren't working, because it was like so deep, it was locked in me. So that's why, I think I had these huge long yoga sessions to kind of really sort of connect physically and sort of feel my body moving again, and just starting to connect with more of a I suppose, a sort of inner peace kind of feeling, because I was still getting a lot of quite scary symptoms and quite distressing OCD things, but doing yoga sort of began to give me an insight into, I know one of your phrases, you see it, you don't have to be it. It really helped me to start to get to grips with that, because it was almost creating a space between me and, if you like, and a lot of these things that were going on, that being able to, I suppose in spiritual terms, talk about this sort of observing self, being able to see what's going on in the body and in the brain and stuff. So then, like you said, that other techniques that you can then do work on top of that, if you like.
Yeah, I think for some people, and I think your case is a really good example of that, it's like you really need that physicality to be able to really get in touch with and land in the body. And then it's almost, there are things that take you away from that, and thoughts that kind of, in terms of some of those kind of thought patterns that you kind of mentioned. But once you've got that bedrock, to use the word you use, that you're kind of landed in your body, then you're more able to kind of see, well, hang on, actually, I can see that thought for what it is, rather than just getting hooked into that and believing that to be a fact. So that gives you that kind of grounded, embodied perspective on the different facets of what's happening. There may be people that are watching this that are thinking, oh my God, well, George was doing 3 hours of yoga a day and I can't get out of bed. So maybe say a bit about how important it was listening to your body along the way, and how there were times where you had, I imagine, to slow down, to back off, And in a sense, it wasn't you pushing your body to do 3 hours of yoga some days. It was your body asking you to do 3 hours of yoga some days. I think it's a subtle but very important distinction.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But I think obviously, as you know, obviously everyone with ME is totally different. And I never had the kind of, if you like, perhaps classic ME of couldn't get out of bed or so exhausted I couldn't do anything. If anything, I had a slight opposite problem because my body was so wired. It was as if I had all this energy that I had to kind of use. Because also on top of doing yoga, I go for quite long walks with family's dogs and stuff, which is also a very healing thing for things like trauma, being out in nature and being around animals and things. But with me, it was almost like my energy was just sort of up here and I had to grab it to bring it down into my body. So I wasn't coming at it from a point of view of feeling sort of absolutely physically exhausted all the time. I was just sort of like fairly stable energy, but just totally wired and up here. And I had to just bring it back down.
Yeah.
And then interestingly, over time, I almost probably, as I started to get better and my system got calmer, I probably got more actual physical symptoms going on. Because I think that was part of my just getting back into my body and actually feeling stuff again, and actually feeling that there was then quite a lot of physical stuff on the nutrition side to actually heal and work with.
How did you navigate that? Because that can be a challenge sometimes. And it's like we're kind of, everything calms, we come more into the body, and actually there's more stuff that's then going on. It must have been a bit frustrating, I imagine, at the time.
Yeah. But at the same time, I don't know. I think doing the yoga and really getting in touch with that, and as a kind of adjunct onto that, it's probably exploring kind of spirituality and a bit more, spiritual teachers and stuff. I suppose I just instinctively knew that I was on the right path then, and that because I knew how good it could feel doing yoga or meditation in terms of that grounded, centered, peaceful state. So I knew that was possible, and that it was almost just a case of cultivating that. And I suppose it helped having the right people around me, because I was sort of told and reassured that it's actually quite normal to sometimes get more symptoms as your body calms down. And I think especially with the trauma state, because when you are locked into that, everything's almost quite numb. You don't actually feel things. So in a funny way, it was always quite a positive thing to actually begin to feel things. So for example, like I'd get a few more tummy issues or stuff like that, which is weird because when I first went to the clinic and had tests, I was told that basically all these physical things were like at a really low level, but I didn't really have any symptoms.
Right.
But sort of several years later, probably when I was retested, these things were improving, and yet I actually
felt worse.
I felt more symptoms.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah.
But at the same time, like I said, I kind of knew instinctively that I was on the right track, and that I just needed to stay present and stick with it, and that things were actually healing and getting better.
Yeah, one of the things that happens in trauma is the body goes into shutdown. So it's like everything just kind of locks down and shuts down. And often we get disassociated, and that's where you get some of the kind of, you describe like the OCD thoughts and some of the kind of stuff where we almost slightly lose our grounding in kind of rationality and in the body in a sense. And as you come back down into the body and that shutdown and freeze response kind of defrost, you actually start to get more in touch with what's going on there. And that certainly was your experience. Is you kind of, as things then evolved and unfolded, say just a bit about the speed of change. I think it was quite a slow process, but in that process, there was still the sense of noticeable progress that was happening.
Yeah, so I've never really had like, sort of maybe the classic sort of model of ME and people getting recoveries that, I don't know, people sometimes have like relapses and it's a bit of a stop-start process. But with me, it wasn't. It was just very, very slow, gradual improvement. I mean, you're talking over years here, but there were never really any kind of major relapses or whatever. It was just a very slow progression. but like I said before, I just knew I was on the right path. And just a very slow progression of getting better. But even when I was getting better, my body was still very reactive to even the nutritional work. So I don't think I've ever ended up on the full dose of anything that Helen's wanted me to be on. If she's wanted me on 3 tablets a day, I probably ended up on half a tablet.
Yeah.
Body, even when I was getting so much better, my body was still very reactive to, which I think is probably linked to the trauma aspect, was very reactive to anything new or taking anything that was trying to stimulate anything like in the way of detox or things like that.
And to someone that might be thinking, well, it just took years to recover, but it would have happened anyway. Just say a bit about how you can clearly kind of mark those moments of change by the things that you were doing, and how you could feel the impact of the things you were using.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. I suppose it's almost with. Yeah, I can. Yeah, you can see the markers as I've gone along. Really, obviously, because I've got to the point where I could do a bit of voluntary work and things, and then I got to the point where I could do a sort of paid part-time job, and then I decided to kind of study and retrain. I now do copywriting and editing and stuff, so I did home study and got involved in that. Which is quite a big thing, because when I started, I couldn't. When I first fell ill, I couldn't read a book, or I couldn't even do anything on the computer. And now, that's what I get paid to do, basically. So it's and then obviously at the point of view of being able to be fully independent and live in my own house, and recently got engaged, it's quite easy to chart all of the markers along the way,
And to see when you use certain interventions came into place, and when you increased the focus on certain things, how they then had the marked impact in terms.
No, definitely. Yes, no. Like I said, because with doing the yoga and then really getting into that, the kind of therapy, cognitive sessions really started to make sense. The nutritional stuff, like I explained, almost getting more symptoms initially, but it made sense, and then as my body kind of, I suppose almost maybe woke up over the years with all the work I was doing, could then really actively see things like the nutrition really helping, and, other psychological tips and techniques had then far more impact, So even then, almost being able to go back to some of the things that you guys were trying to teach me back at the start, like stops or simple grounding techniques, then began to actually work or have more effect, because my body was getting in a calmer state.
Yeah.
It didn't take 3 hours of yoga anymore to kind of calm down.
It becomes faster ways of getting there.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone that's watching this, that's thinking, well, yoga is just a form of stretching? Like, how can that possibly have an impact? What would you say about what it's meant for you?
Yeah. Well, I suppose, yoga, I suppose the popular view now of yoga is that it's like a sort of trendy exercise and stuff. And there are all these weird and wonderful versions of it. But I suppose I was very lucky with the teacher I've had. So it was, I suppose from day one, it was always, she sort of taught me about more, say, the spiritual aspects of it. So it's the physical is really secondary to yoga. It is effectively like a moving meditation. It is about the body, mind, and spirit working together in the moment. And it's a sort of very deep aspect to it. But I think, I don't know, certainly from my point of view, I've never been to a yoga class. It's something that I was taught one-on-one by a teacher, and something that I then practiced on my own every day. So I think if people are going to start it for the first time, I would probably recommend not going to a class. If you can, try and find a teacher who can actually have some one-on-one sessions and teach you a bit about it first.
There's also a lot of good stuff on the internet these days where someone can kind of find a very gentle class, or find a class with a particular focus. That's, I think, often helpful.
Yeah, because I think the breathing aspect is very important to yoga, which I think perhaps if you're starting it for the first time and maybe going to a class, it's quite difficult to perhaps grasp that. But if you're taught how to do it properly, that's integral to, to be able to calm down really. And certainly in my case, my sort of whole body and my muscles actually relaxing and letting go. I could say getting from the point where I could hardly bend down and touch my knees to the point where I can now touch the floor easily, But that's just tension, leaving my body basically over the years of doing it.
Yeah.
But certainly, you certainly kind of need to know what you're doing. And I think certainly, I'd urge anyone to explore the kind of the spiritual side of yoga, because that's ultimately is where it all comes from,
Yes.
So,
and for some people, that piece is really important. For others, it's the physical and emotional, psychological practices. I think what's important, and different people find different entry points. Any final comments that you want to make in terms of looking back on your experience of kind of key lessons that we haven't covered that you learned from what you've been through?
I think it's probably a bit of a cliche, but just you've got to anyone who's ill and can't see a way out of it, I just say you've got to just keep going. Don't give up, because you can. You definitely can get better. Certainly from where I was a number of years ago, I never have thought I would be where I am now. But you need the right help and support, and I think the Optimum Clinic are great with that, because they do really push this whole holistic approach, and there's very much a blueprint for why you are ill and what you need to do to get better, and you just then need to really commit to that, and really work on calming your nervous system down, and obviously different things work for different people, but I know that yoga and meditation is really helpful for lots of people, certainly for me.
And I think it's also great to have a reminder, because, as much as yoga's always been kind of a part of our approach, people do the 90-day program and they get, access to online yoga classes. We've been, from day one, we've always said, yoga is important. It's good to have stories like this to help people realize that for some people, yoga is the bedrock. It's the most important piece. For others, it will be something else. But it really can be a critical part of the path for people. And it's great to hear your story. And I'm really pleased to hear, having not spoken to you for a number of years, I'm really pleased to hear how things have changed. And well done for putting in the work, because clearly it's been a tough journey and a long journey. But I'm so pleased to hear how life is now.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, and I still do yoga every day. So
Very good.
I probably will do for the rest of my life. So.
Good.
But it's,
thanks.
Thank you.